So, the deal behind the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters branding was pretty obvious. With the fighting game boom perpetuated by Street Fighter II in full swing, Konami wanted a piece of that happy pie, and since they held said Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles license at the time, they used that as the basis for 3 completely different fighting games for 3 completely different video game systems. Tournament Fighters graced the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Super Nintendo, and today's subject matter, the Sega Genesis. Tournament Fighters has a proper story of sorts, I suppose. Apparently Krang and the evil Foot Clan has kidnapped Master Splinter, and it's up to the Turtles and a few of their friends to save them. Before they could, they have to fight off their evil clones with their evil color palettes and garbled voices and stuff. You know, that actually makes complete sense and provides a logical reason for these characters to fight each other. They're not really fighting each other, they're fighting their clones. Tournament Fighters boasts 8 playable fighters. In addition to the 4 turtles, you also got Casey Jones, you got April, you got Ray Fillet, and you got Sisyphus, or whatever he's called. Anyway, you pick your fighter, and then you pick your starting stage, and you begin to mow down the clones. Once you beat all the clones, you'll progress to a dinosaur planet where you'll face off against a Triceraton. Defeat the Triceraton to move on to the Technodrome and face off against Krang in his android body. Defeat Krang, and you end up facing the game's final boss, Karai, with perennial arch-nemesis Shredder taking a sabbatical for this one. So I guess Genesis didn't what Nintendo did. Lame. When you pick a fighter, you can also set their speed and power, which also alters their speed and power. I guess I didn't see much of a point, but there you go. Tournament Fighters boasts 4 modes of play. The story mode, your usual arcade mode where you beat everybody to get the same ending that everybody gets, with a limited number of continues that you could at least set in the options menu. Your usual 2-player versus mode. The tournament mode, which is more of a survival mode than a proper tournament where you're tasked with facing off against 88 opponents, good luck with that. And a practice mode, which is actually more of an exhibition match against a computer opponent of your choice than what one would perceive a practice mode to be. So here's the deal. Each fighter has a basic set of attacks along with a couple special moves, which can be performed with the usual, quarter circle charge motions. You've got 3 buttons to work with, a punch button, a kick button, and a taunt button, which is used for taunting because sure, why not? When you're near defeat and your health meter starts to flash, you can perform a one-off ultra desperation attack that can inflict massive damage. At first glance, the combat might seem a bit rudimentary as a result. While not exactly sluggish, the game doesn't exactly allow for players to chain together elaborate combos, as the individual blows slightly pushes back your opponent, and there's even a brief period of invincibility after each landed blow. So the emphasis is trying to land blows and inflict as much damage as possible without being too flashy about it, because the game really doesn't allow for it. Even though there's the usual skill setting on here, the AI in general is rather brutal, aggressive, and relentlessly challenging even on the easiest of settings. You'll probably scrape through the first couple of fights relatively well, but you'll eventually get to a point where if you're not in tune with the ninja arts, prepare for pain. The character balance in general is so-so, but once you toss in Casey Jones and his super bomb thing that can do massive damage and is relatively easy to pull off, well, so much for balance. There is a nice bit where if you throw people on a certain spot on certain stages enough times, you'll actually break the floor and move down to a lower level, which is a nice little detail. Tournament Fighters on Genesis adopts a much more grittier style compared to its contemporaries, less inspired by the Fred Wolf cartoon and more by the original comics. Kinda. Sorta. But it's a style that doesn't seem too out of place, but something that works well within the capabilities of the hardware. While the Turtles aren't exactly the best looking fighters on display here, they at least look imposing. The rest of the fighters look fairly decent for the most part, and I like that there's separate color palettes for human controlled and computer controlled players. It's a rather nice touch which fits in with the rest of the game's Clone Wars story, or whatever they call it here. The various planets are rather creative and colorful, if not a bit barren at times. In terms of the visuals, they look fine, and some of them, such as the Mirage Planet, are a treat to behold with its various colors and effects, but it would have been nice to see some spectators. And I'm not just talking about the dinosaur or the lava creature or something or other. Some humanoids would have been nice. Sound is another strong aspect here. There's some sweet sounding techno beats, and they range from energetic themes in the Red Planet to the somber themes like on the Ice Planet to the surreal Mirage Planet's theme, and so on and so forth. All around great tunes that fit the environment and the overall tone of the game. Sound effects are adequate, nothing amazingly outstanding, but it gets the job done. Voice bites are clear sounding and audible if not a bit grainy. There's some semblance of effort in trying to give these characters different voices, or at least different tones, but then it doesn't always come across as such. Still, points for effort, I suppose. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters for the Sega Genesis is merely alright. It feels somewhat underwhelming at first, only 8 fighters, only a handful of moves per fighter, a fighting system that feels rudimentary and slow, and a relentless AI that all but guarantees that there's more fun to be had in 2-player bouts than playing with the computer. And yet for what seems like a bare-bones package, Tournament Fighters at least works properly. Controls are smooth, it's easy to pull off moves, the fighting is functional, the presentation in terms of visuals and audio especially is top-notch, and it's also one of the few fighters on the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive where you don't need a 6-button gamepad to play this properly. The 3-button controller suits this game perfectly fine. For all intents and purposes, Tournament Fighters is not one of the greatest fighting games ever conceived, but at the very least it's a pretty decent one. And it's a game that can make the claim that it's made for the Genesis, as opposed to being something rehashed and recycled like that other Turtles game on the console. All in all, a worthwhile addition to any Genesis collection.